Practice of the Hinayana Path. The key word in the practice of the Hinayana Path is the Vijnanas, which in Tibetan is Dulwa, which means taming oneself. The word is very appropriate if we consider, for example, the taming of an elephant. An elephant is very wild at first, and if we want to ride it, to get it to work or lead it somewhere, we can't do it. But by gradually taming the elephant, we can ride it, we can get it to work, and we can lead it around. In fact, it becomes very docile and under our control. We can apply this analogy to ourselves. At first, our mind, body, and speech are very coarse and wild too. This means that just small physical irritations can cause us to flare up and fight. A little bit of verbal irritation upsets us and we begin to shout, scream, and abuse others. Small mental irritations make us think all sorts of nasty and aggressive things. So in the beginning, our mind is very wild and out of control. Hinayana practice is designed to train our mind so that eventually it becomes very docile and workable, and we are able to cope properly in any situation. The process of training is related particularly to commitments we make. We take certain vows and precepts to train ourselves. We do this because we have become used to doing unvirtuous things, and to get out of that habit, we make a certain promise or commitment to do virtuous activities and bind oneself to that activity. This is a very practical way of training ourselves to refrain from unvirtuous activities and accustoming ourselves gradually to virtuous activities. At first glance, one may think that the commitments and vows are really restrictive and unpleasant and keep us from doing many nice things. It seems like being put into a straitjacket or a prison. Actually, it's not like that at all. The Sanskrit word for this training, which covers making vows and commitments, is sila, which means coolness. That was translated into Tibetan as sultrim, which means keeping one's discipline, in the way taught by the Buddha. This idea of coolness gives the impression of relaxation and easiness. This is a very good word because one can see that when one maintains virtue, that creates happiness, and this leads to an easy and good situation. And when one practices unvirtuous activities of the body, it causes problems, difficulties, and hardships. Likewise, when one practices improper speech, more and more problems arise. By maintaining good and pure speech, very pleasant results emerge. The same applies to the mind. When one keeps the mind very pure, it brings much happiness. So when one thinks about it carefully, one can see that keeping the commitments, making promises, and restricting one's activities to virtuous ones is, in fact, the key to happiness. This is not at all a restriction or a difficult situation, because it is the key to happiness. This is why the Sanskrit word sila implies calmness or pleasantness. In order to understand the full power of the meaning of coolness for discipline, one needs to think about its origins. The word comes from India, which is a very hot country in the summer. When we say coolness in the West, it does not strike us as particularly good quality because it gets cold here. In Tibet, they didn't translate it as coolness because Tibet is a very cold country. But in India, coolness is a very valued quality. When the weather is very hot, it is very uncomfortable and one can't do what one wants. When one finds coolness in a hot place, one feels very happy and comfortable, and one is in control. So when one is not committed to goodness, one has a lot of problems and is very uncomfortable and is not really in control of the situation. When one has this commitment to virtue, it is the key to happiness and one controls one's life. So that word coolness really gives a very vivid insight into the whole nature of self-control and good conduct. The Buddha has given us certain commitments and vows to develop our good qualities and give up our bad qualities. But if we can't give up all the bad things totally, we shouldn't become depressed and think that there is no way we can practice the Dharma. The Buddha, in his compassion, has given us many different kinds of commitments. We can take the vows of full ordination of a monk or nun. The number of vows for fully ordained Buddhist monks and nuns is in the order of several hundred, and commit ourselves to a great deal of virtue and refrain from all unvirtuous things. If we can't manage that, then there is a level of novice ordination. Then there are 8 layman's vows called Genyan vows in Tibetan. We don't have to make all 8, but can make 1, 2, or however many we can manage to practice. Even if we can't manage these vows for our whole life, we can make them for periods of time. We can observe the 8 precepts for 1 day, or a number of days, such as while we are in retreat. So it is a very flexible situation that can be adopted by different persons according to their capacities. The motivation of the Hinayana practitioner is mainly concerned with working on his or her own happiness and liberation. At this level, one is not especially concerned with working for everyone. Nevertheless, working principally for one's own emancipation is not a bad thing. In fact, it is a very good thing, because if one is not able to work for everyone, at least one is removing the suffering and its causes for oneself. There is nothing at all wrong with that. Of course, if one can work helping everyone, that is wonderful. Actually, even wishing to help others is not too workable until one has some degree of clarity and emancipation oneself. Therefore, working towards one's own purification is a very positive step on the journey towards eventually helping others. It is a very good, especially for individuals beginning the spiritual path, because it is much easier to think in terms of benefiting oneself. This is why the first wheel of Dharma was the phase of the Buddha's teachings, which was mainly concerned with showing the way to self-liberation.